In rook endgames, the 7th rank is especially important. If we can get control of the 7th rank with our rook, we'll have a lot of power because many of the pawns are situated on the 7th rank. For example, in this position, if white can get control of the 7th rank, then he'll be attacking the b pawn, the f pawn, and perhaps the g and h pawns. So when you can, get your rook on the 7th rank. Therefore, in this case, white's best move is to move rook to d7. After rook to d7, we immediately are hitting the b pawn, and since the b pawn is fixed there, black is actually forced to play the move rook to b8 in order to protect it. So after rook to b8, we can already see that our rook here is much more active than his passive rook defending the pawn. Our rook can control over here and over here, while his rook is stuck on b8, doing only one job. So after rook to b8, it's time to make our other pieces active. Our rook's already on a good square, so we don't need to move it again. Let's move our king then. So we play king to f3 to centralize our king more. Black might also try something like king to f8 to activate his own king, but we can play the move king to e4 to put our king in the center more. Now he can attack our rook with king to e8. However, our rook must still stay on the 7th rank. Moving back to say d2 or d1 would be a mistake because that frees his own rook. Black's rook can come to rook d8 and offer a trade. Instead, if rook to c7, black's rook here is still stuck on the b8 square guarding the b7 pawn, and white's rook maintains its control on the f7 pawn, forcing the black's king to stay in place as well. If black tries to move some of his pawns off the 7th rank, for example g6, then white can play the move g4, and after h6, white is going to break through his own on the king side. So after h6, white plays the move f5. If g takes, then g takes. And now, if black takes on f5, white comes in with his king, and eventually he'll win the pawn on f7. After g takes f5, if black just plays the move h5, then now we can play the move f takes e6 and f takes e6. Now we can see how paralyzed black's position is. His rook is stuck here, so it can't really move. The king is limited by the rook, and it can't ever get past the 7th rank, so it's forced to stay on the 8th rank. And after the king stays on the 8th rank, we can come in with our own king, for example, like this, and we can win all of his pawns. Since black's pieces are completely paralyzed, he can't really do anything to stop this plan. So for example, after f takes e6, f takes e6, we can first play the move rook to h7. After rook to h7, the idea is to come to maybe h8 to skewer the rook. So this actually forces the win pretty quickly, because after rook to c8, white can actually decide to just directly check and win the pawns after trading the rooks. So after trading the rooks, white can play king to f4, and after king to d7, then we can just come over on king to g5, already threatening to win a pawn on h5. Now it's very important that we calculate this correctly, right? After king to c6, a5, we see that king b5, we see that black is already making some threats of his own against white's pawns. So we need to calculate this correctly. In this position, white played rook takes c8, knowing that this position would be a win. But did he intend to take this pawn, or did he have some other strategy? If you want to pause your video, you can. The correct answer here is actually he had some other strategy. White actually wanted to play king to f6, the idea being that he can take on e6 later on and promote this pawn. This pawn is closer to the e8 square, so it's actually a little bit quicker. So after king to f6, then black can take on a5, of course, but white can also take on e6. So now after king takes b6, it's off to the races. Black will try to get his pawn promoted first, and white will try to get this pawn promoted first. So after king takes b6, then we play the move king f7. And if a5, then we play the move e6, followed by e7 and e8. Clearly, we can see that white will be promoting his pawn first. So if black plays the move a4, e7, a3, e8 queen, black is actually one move short. After a2, white can come back with queen a4, and he will be able to win this pawn. Since black never gets to promote, white will be up a queen, and he will win the game. Now, I know this was a very sharp variation that required a good amount of calculation, starting from the idea of rook h7 to rook h8. However, it's also worth noting here that if white just played the move king to f4, that also would have been sufficient to win. So if he plays king f4, if black just sits around doing nothing, king f8, then we can come over king g5, for example, and start winning pawns. After king f4, if black tries something like rook to d8, the idea being something like a fork here, it turns out that white can actually just continue with king to g5. And if he plays the move rook to d4 here to try to win this pawn, after a5, there's really no way for black to save this pawn. Rook d7 here obviously is just slower than the last line. And if he just takes on a4, if he just comes on a4 and tries to take the pawn, or goes to d5 and tries to take the pawn, we can just play the move king to f6. If black does take the pawn, then we can play the move king to e6 check, or king to e6 threatening checkmate. And after black plays the move something like king to d8 or king to f8, we can just take on b7, for example, winning a pawn and eventually winning the game. So really black playing rook to d8 and to d4 doesn't really work because white eventually will be able to win this pawn and this pawn, so 2 pawns. Therefore, either black is forced to defend passively and his aggressive option doesn't work. The rook on the 7th rank here completely dominates black's position and white will be able to win this position. We can see how important the rook on the 7th rank is, especially since it ties down the other pieces to the defense of some pawns on the 7th rank.